Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for this breakout. My name is Caitlin Rook, and I am a spokesperson for Students for Life, and I'm also a legislative assistant with Students for Life Action. I'm so happy to be here with you guys today. I think this is one of the most informative breakout sessions you could have chosen, so good job on your part. If you guys were looking for a life on the ballot, understanding abortion referenda, you have made it to the right spot. And if you weren't looking for that breakout session, well, you're here, so you might as well stay. So I am honored to introduce these four amazing ladies we have as our speakers this afternoon. First, we have Denise Burke. Denise serves as senior counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom, where she is a member of the Center for Legislative Advocacy. Prior to serving ADF, she served as vice president of legal affairs for Americans United for Life, where she routinely advised legislators, policy groups, and state attorney generals on life issues. So please welcome Denise. Next, we have Julia Payne. Julia serves as legal counsel for Alliance Defending Freedom's Center for Life. In her role, she defends the sanctity of life by litigating both beginning and ending of life issues. Before joining ADF, she worked at the Office of the Indiana Attorney General as a Deputy Attorney General for 5 years. While at the AG's office, she managed all of Indiana's pro-life litigation, among some other important cases. So please welcome Julia. Next, we have Erica Steinmiller-Perdomo. Erica serves as legal counsel on the Center for Life at Alliance Defending Freedom. Before joining ADF, Erica clerked on the Florida Supreme Court and Florida's 3rd District Court of Appeals. She also served as a criminal prosecutor in the Miami-Dade County State Attorney's Office. Erica is admitted to practice law in Florida and here in the District of Columbia. So please give her a warm welcome. And last but certainly not least, we have Bernadette Tacey. Bernadette graduated from Fresno State with her bachelor's degree in 2017 and her master's degree in 2019. She co-founded the Fresno State Students for Life group and served as president from 2016 to 2019. After spending some time as a full-time speech-language pathologist, she ultimately felt called to further the pro-life cause with her work and now serves as on the communications team at Alliance Defending Freedom. So please welcome Bernadette.
Thank you, Caitlin. So today we're going to be discussing abortion-related ballot initiatives. Obviously, if you read the title of this talk, then you know that you're in the right place. Today, we are going to talk about the history of abortion-related ballot initiatives, what to look for when reading the language of these ballot initiatives, and then also what's to come in 2024. And we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for Q&A, about 10 minutes or so. So we're going to go ahead and start off with Denise. Abortion on the ballot is, of course, not unique to 2024. Can you give us a quick history lesson on abortion-related ballot initiatives?
Sure. Since 1970, 54 ballot measures in the states have concerned abortion. 43 of these, or about 80%, would be termed pro-life measures. And these have included things such as abortion limits, which is setting a gestational limit on abortion, defining personhood, specifically defining the unborn as a person entitled to protection under the state constitution, measures requiring things like parental involvement for a minor's abortion. In fact, California has tried that 3 different times in the last 20 years. And measures prohibiting public funding of abortion. But some of the most notable ballot measures have been measures to declare that there is no state constitutional right to abortion or to state taxpayer funding of abortion. And prior to the Dobbs decision, 4 states approved such amendments: Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, and West Virginia. And as we all probably know, since the Dobbs decision, 2 states, Kansas and Kentucky, failed to adopt similar measures. So if 43 of those measures were pro-life, that means that 11 measures were termed pro-abortion. And sadly, voters approved 8 of those 11 measures. And most recently, that has included state ballot initiatives to declare that there is, in fact, a state constitutional right to abortion, which is in essence establishing a mini Roe in any particular state. So states like California, Michigan, Ohio, and Vermont have recently approved such initiatives and expanded access to abortion in their states.
And Erica, how is 2024 shaping up?
As Denise mentioned, we're dealing with these ballot initiatives. Before Roe, no state had any constitutional right to abortion in the state constitution. And when Dobbs ruled that there was no right to abortion in our nation's constitution, now in 2024, just a year and a half after Dobbs, we have almost a dozen states that are looking to enshrine a right to abortion in their individual state constitutions. 2 have already been approved for ballots in 2024 by their state legislatures. That's in Maryland and New York. Most of the potential ballot initiatives are actually voter initiated. So that means they're going through this legal process. The voters are gathering signatures. They have to gather a certain amount of signatures from registered voters in that state in order for the ballot initiative to be voted on in that state. So states that are considering these voter-initiated ballot referenda for 2024 include Arizona, Arkansas, Colorado, Florida, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Hampshire, and South Dakota. And then there's actually 3 of those states, Colorado, Florida, and Nebraska, where it's reported that there's also going to be potentially a pro-life measure. So the voters might be faced between voting on a pro-abortion and a pro-life measure in those states.
Mm-hmm. And Denise, thinking about the 2023 and 2024 ballot initiatives, is there any one that's particularly bad compared to the rest? And how does the language of each ballot initiative relate to one another?
A few of these measures, for example, in Missouri, in Nebraska, and in South Dakota, focus exclusively and explicitly on abortion. So they're seeking to constitutionally protect abortion. But what we're seeing with a majority of the measures, they're not using necessarily the term abortion, but they're using terms like reproductive freedom or reproductive autonomy or a similar term. And the meaning of these terms, reproductive freedom or reproductive autonomy, is not adequately defined in these measures. So voters don't necessarily know what they're voting for. And these terms, reproductive autonomy, reproductive freedom, can be termed or interpreted very broadly to include things other than abortion, such as maybe mandates for fertility treatment for people who are infertile. It was interesting in Missouri. Initially, they had 17 different abortion amendment proposals submitted. And they were trying different combinations of language. And their tactics seemed to be, well, we're going to see which is the most radical that we can get away with the voters in Missouri. Some of them on their face seemed to say, well, we'll only allow abortion up till viability. And we'll allow parental involvement for minors, and we don't want taxpayer funding for abortion. But as you'll hear as we discuss these measures further, a lot of those assurances are illusory. They weren't correct. The one that is actually going to be gathering signatures and possibly approved for the ballot in Missouri purports to say it protects abortion up to viability. But as you'll hear later, that's really a meaningless assurance in the language. But all of these ballot measures seek to expand access to abortion, to limit the ability of state legislatures to respond to the growing evidence of abortion's harms to women, to the unborn, to families, and to society, to prohibit their ability to enact protective laws in the future, and they threaten the existence of existing pro-life laws in those states. And you notice from the list that Erica provided, there are a lot of states in there that have good pro-life protections in place. They threaten parental rights and healthcare freedom of conscience.
And you'll see a lot of those trends among a lot of the different ballot initiatives, and you've probably read some of the language of some of these ballot initiatives that have popped up. But it's not just 2024. Is it beyond 2024 as well, Julia?
Unfortunately, pro-abortion advocates are definitely looking beyond 2024 as well. Pennsylvania and Virginia already have ballot proposals for 2025 and 2026, and more states are likely to follow, especially if many of the 2024 initiatives pass.
And also, if you've been paying attention to the news at all, you know that Ohio just had a vote on their ballot initiative recently. So we're going to dissect that a little bit more, and we're going to start off with Denise first on that. The results in Ohio were obviously very disappointing. So can you talk to us about some of the key takeaways from what came out of that?
Sure. Money, no surprise, was a huge issue in these campaigns. The pro-life side was outspent 3-1 in Ohio, with much of that money coming from out of the state of Ohio. And I'm sure that's not a surprise. The abortion advocates were able to make very effective use of America's treasured tradition of freedom. They made freedom their issue on these ballot initiatives, saying that reproductive freedom was essential to women's abilities to function in society. And they also made really good use of the argument that we want to keep the government out of healthcare. So they argued failing to approve this amendment and to allow the existing pro-life laws in Ohio to stand was allowing government to meddle in women's healthcare decisions. So they made very effective use of themes that conservatives and pro-lifers often use. In our arguments, we found that 76% of the voters in Ohio supported, at least nominally, the concept of reproductive freedom and keeping the government out of women's health care. So going forward, we need to be able to counter that narrative and to break it down. We found that voters made up their mind before Labor Day, so 2 months before the election, which means that we need to have a consistent and early effort to talk to these voters. And we also need to make significant efforts to reach constituencies that we often think we already have locked up. In Ohio, 18% of Republicans, 13% of self-identified conservatives, 17% of Republican women, 19% of people who said they had voted for President Trump, 30% of people who said they believed that life begins at conception, 24% of evangelicals, 52% of Catholics, and 31% of voters who said they attend church more than once a week voted in favor of Ohio's reproductive freedom amendment. So clearly we cannot take any single voter or voter group for granted.
Erica, could you just kind of summarize for us what you think the potential impact of the 2024 season will bring when it comes to abortion-related ballot initiatives?
Yeah, so those are definitely sobering statistics that Denise shared with us. And these ballot initiatives are really scary because they can create a unrestricted constitutional right to abortion up to birth, so all the way through all 9 months of pregnancy for virtually any reason. So that's what we're looking at with these abortion amendments is abortion on demand up to birth for almost any reason. That's more extreme than what was allowed under Roe and Casey. Under Roe and Casey, the states were still able to enact some limits, and there was protections into that third trimester of pregnancy. This also threatens to eviscerate protective abortion-related laws that are currently on the books in the states. So even when we were under the Roe regime for 50 years, states that cared about protecting life, that cared about protecting women, were still trying to pass laws that related to abortion. And this would threaten those laws that provide reasonable and much-needed protection for women and girls and for the unborn.
Julia, what are some of the threats that we're seeing from these specific abortion-related ballot initiatives?
Well, there are several threats that these pose. First of all, they threaten women's health and safety by trading the robust legal protections that many states have set up to protect the safety of women who are having abortion procedures. And they are dangerously and intentionally vague. Some of these measures are written in a way that they could permit abortion on demand up to birth for any reason. Moreover, they undermine decades of efforts by states to protect women and unborn children, including state laws protecting women from coerced abortion and from abuse. Some of them could force taxpayers to pay for elective abortions, and they might compromise parental rights, for instance, state laws requiring parental consent for abortions on minors. And they also threaten the freedom of conscience of many healthcare professionals who choose not to perform abortions.
That's a huge and heavy list. So please be paying attention when we go into the specifics of each of these. And we are going to go into the specifics of each of these. But first, Denise, can you give us just an example of how these proposals can result in unrestricted, unregulated abortions?
They're written in a way that says prohibiting any quote-unquote interference with a woman's right to an abortion. And think about how broadly that word interference could be interpreted. I'll give you some examples. Is it interference if the woman is poor and cannot pay for the abortion herself for taxpayers not to pay for it? Is it interference for a minor to have to get her parents' consent, or at least notify them before she undergoes a procedure? Is it interference given the fact that her parents may refuse to give that consent? Is it interference for a state to give the woman certain information that might dissuade her from having an abortion, or ask her to wait at least 24 or 48 or 72 hours after getting that information before she has an abortion? Arguably, it is. And we would certainly see abortion advocates making those arguments, that any sort of laws that delay or touch on a woman's unfettered right to make this decision would be seen as interference. And further, a lot of the language that is used in these proposals is undefined, as Julia mentioned, is vague, and we don't know how those terms are going to be interpreted. We have also seen them using definitions that are in fact medically inaccurate. For example, some of them purport to prohibit abortion after, or allow prohibitions, I should say, on abortion after viability. But the devil's in the details, right, a lot of the time. And how they define viability is actually sickening, because their definition of viability would preclude a lot of the procedures and things that they do in the NICU to save preterm babies. Because their definition of viability means without the imposition of extraordinary measures. What's an extraordinary measure? Is it a ventilator in the NICU? What sort of procedures are done on preterm infants might be seen as an extraordinary step. And the standards that they use to try to define maternal health, because they'll say, well, you can regulate perhaps just to protect the woman's health. They don't really tell us how we could do that. But then we don't know how they define maternal health. So in essence, they would invest abortion providers with unfettered discretion to decide if an abortion is necessary for a woman's health. So basically, as my colleagues have said, abortion at any time, for any reason. And as Erica mentioned, these sham standards go far beyond what we had under Roe and Casey, because Roe and Casey allowed us to regulate abortion in certain circumstances because a woman's right was not seen as being absolute. So if the state had an interest in safeguarding maternal health, protecting unborn life, they were permitted to regulate. And arguably under these proposals, the way they are written, using the terms like interference, a medically inaccurate definition of viability, no real standards for maternal health, all of that would go away.
So you see the trend of the fact that the pro-abortion side is using these nice terms, reproductive freedom. Well, that sounds nice. Maternal health, that sounds nice. But the way in which they're using it is something that we need to be able to dissect accurately. And we are so grateful to have these three amazing minds with us, these legal minds, Denise and Erica and Julia. And we're grateful that they're on our side, helping us to understand what this truly could mean if they were to take it as far as they could. So Julia, could you describe for us the threat that such an unrestricted constitutional so-called right to an abortion would have on existing pro-life laws?
Yes, so these proposals are likely to embolden abortionists to challenge any state laws regulating abortion, even common sense measures for the protection of women's health and safety or the protection of unborn children. So in the Dobbs decision, the Supreme Court identified several what they call state interests or reasons that states can regulate abortion. And so that's respect for and preservation of prenatal life at all stages of development, the protection of maternal health and safety, the elimination of particularly gruesome or barbaric medical procedures, preservation of the integrity of the medical profession, mitigation of fetal pain, and prevention of discrimination on the basis of race, sex, or disability. But as Denise mentioned earlier, many of these proposals are very broad and go far beyond Roe and Casey and could endanger even state laws that concern those 6 state interests that Dobbs said that the states could regulate. And so, for example, they could allow abortionists to challenge laws protecting against discriminatory abortions. Many states prohibit abortion for the sole reason of the fetus's race, sex, or disability, such as Down syndrome, and abortionists may challenge those laws. They could strike down laws that are preventing certain barbaric abortion procedures. For instance, many states regulate dismemberment abortions, or state laws regulating partial birth abortions. And they could allow abortionists to challenge laws that guarantee women and girls provide informed consent for abortion. And so, as you can see, many of these democratically enacted laws could be challenged by abortionists, and they would merely have to argue that under the standard Denise mentioned earlier, that these laws interfere with their abortion access.
Well, not only that, but there are instances in which the pro-abortion advocates are already taking advantage of the language of these ballot initiatives. You might hear from the other side, well, oh, silly pro-lifers, they're making all these claims, these egregious claims. That's not what we're trying to do. We just want to make sure that a woman has a right to choose. But we are already seeing the result of what these ballot initiatives could mean in different states. So Denise, could you go through that for us?
If I told you that it didn't take long for abortion advocates to start trying to take advantage of these approved state constitutional amendments in places like Michigan or Ohio, would that surprise you? No. Michigan adopted its pro-abortion constitutional amendment in November of 2022. At the opening of its 2023 legislative session in January, legislation was introduced to strip Michigan's 1931 pre-Roe abortion ban from the books and to take away limits on insurance coverage for abortion, because one of the key goals of the abortion lobby has been to get full insurance coverage under Medicaid and other things for abortion, but they also stripped out the state's health and safety standards for abortion facilities. So it seems to be okay for many on the other side to have Kermit Gosnell setting up shop in Michigan. Governor Whitmer just signed that bill. And we're expecting additional legislation in Michigan to do away with other limits on public taxpayer funding for abortion, as well as things such as informed consent requirements. Less than a month after Ohio's Issue 1 was approved this past November, a measure was introduced in Ohio to invalidate the state's heartbeat law, as well as other pro-life protections. Now, thankfully in Ohio, the legislature is not likely to do that. So what we did see was the ACLU in Ohio file a complaint in an ongoing lawsuit alleging that the Ohio Constitution now plainly and explicitly answers the question about whether the heartbeat law in Ohio is constitutional or not. And they say that the approval of Issue 1 means that the heartbeat law is no longer constitutional. In fact, I'll read to you one sentence from their complaint. They say that the citizens of our state have made it crystal clear that Ohioans have the right to make their own personal medical decisions regarding reproductive freedom, including abortion, and that abortion bans in this state will not be tolerated. And that we're still waiting for a decision in that case.
So clearly it's not silly pro-lifers. They're making all these outrageous claims. It's that this is actually happening in states that have already passed some of these ballot initiatives. Denise, could these proposals be interpreted to force taxpayers to fund abortions?
Absolutely. And what's been going on in Michigan points that out. Because among the insurance policies that now have to cover abortion are insurance policies that cover state government employees. Who pays for those? Michigan taxpayers pay for those. Currently, most federal and state laws prohibit taxpayer dollars from funding abortions except in very limited circumstances, such as to save the mother's life or in cases of rape or incest. And most taxpayers agree with that, regardless of their stance on abortion. Even those who support abortion often do not think that taxpayer dollars should be used to fund it. In fact, in a recent Marist poll, 60% of all voters surveyed said they were opposed or strongly opposed to the use of state taxpayer dollars to pay for abortion. But under these laws, imagine going to work knowing that the tax dollars generated by your labor are going to be used to line the pockets of Planned Parenthood or other abortionists. And this is the reality that we face in these states considering these state constitutional amendments. Because failure to fund the termination of innocent life could be seen as an improper interference with this newly created state constitutional right to abortion.
Erica, what about parental rights?
Well, parental rights are being threatened also by these initiatives because, again, because they're so broad and they're so vague, and it uses very expansive language, like any person can come into the state and have an abortion. That any person includes adults, but it also includes minors. It also includes children. Most states right now require parental involvement in a decision to have an abortion. It requires parental notification, parental consents, because parents have a critical role and responsibility in protecting the well-being of their daughters. And children can't understand the long-term physical, emotional, mental consequences of their decisions in general, but especially a huge decision like having an abortion or having a medical procedure. And but because this is opening it up for an unfettered right for any person, including children, to have an abortion, any interference with that could be problematic under the amendment. So, for example, having a parent or a guardian involved in the decision for a young girl to have an abortion could be considered interference that is prohibited under an abortion referenda. And these could be misused to, exclude parents altogether from the decision to have abortions. And also with the expansive any person language, it's not just talking about residents of the state. So if a state passes an abortion referenda that has this constitutional right, it will also protect girls coming from other states into that state to have an abortion. So even in states where life is protected, even in states that have protections for minors, they can still come into a state with this expansive abortion right, and minors can be able to get an abortion there without their parents even knowing. So who's the person that's taking them to another state to have an abortion? So really removing parents from the equation weakens protections for children's health and well-being.
Mm-hmm. And Julia, how about the healthcare professionals and their conscience protections when it comes to what they do every single day to save lives?
Yes, Bernadette. So most of you probably know that our nation has a long history and tradition protecting the moral, religious, and conscientious rights of all medical professionals. And many states even have laws protecting freedom of conscience specifically for healthcare professionals and permitting them to opt out of performing or participating in abortions or other medical procedures that they object to. However, what these proposals do is they give abortion advocates an opportunity to argue in court that these sort of opt-outs, I don't want to perform this procedure because it violates my religion, are impermissibly interfering with the so-called fundamental right to abortion. And so this sets up a sort of battle of rights. You have on one side the genuinely fundamental right of conscience, and then on the other side you would have this new constitutional right to reproductive freedom, whatever that means. And the danger is that the right of conscience could be considered subservient to this new constitutional right. And so this threatens the freedom of conscience for healthcare professionals, and it endangers healthcare for all. For instance, surveys have indicated that many healthcare professionals would rather leave the medical field altogether than to have to violate their religion or their deeply held conscience beliefs. And so it could lead more nurses and doctors and professionals to leave the medical field or as students to choose not to study medicine at all.
And that's pretty scary, right? I mean, up to this point, we've already seen issues with protections, conscience protections. Luckily, we've seen great conscience protections in a lot of those pro-life states, but now even in Ohio, which presumably was a pro-life state, is seeing this threat to their healthcare professionals as well. Now that we understand a lot about what we've been seeing on these abortion-related ballot initiatives, I also want to address the communication side. So how do we talk about all these issues? It might be a little bit easier for a lawyer to kind of digest it and then talk about it in a 45-minute panel, but how do we talk about it to our friends and family members, to our church leaders, in an op-ed, in a media interview, in a blog that you write, or a social media post? The last 3 points that we just talked about were taxpayer funding of abortions, parental rights, and healthcare professionals' conscience rights. Those three are really big. It's egregious what they want to do to those three things. Ensure that you are forced to pay for abortions, ensure that parental rights are taken away, and also ensure that healthcare professionals don't have those conscience protections anymore. So we do want to focus in on those three things, especially, not only because of how horrific they are, but also because we know that the American public is on our side on those issues. There is extensive polling, especially on the taxpayer funding issue. There is extensive polling over years and years that you can see detailed by even the Washington Post. They actually have an article that goes through a lot of the different polls that have been taken over several different years having to do with taxpayer funding of abortions and what the American public thinks about it. They don't want to pay for abortions. They simply don't want to pay for them. The same thing goes with parental rights. Generally, people agree, Americans agree, that parents should have rights, that they should have notification laws in place, that they should have parental consent laws in place. So again, the American public is on our side on those issues. And the same thing goes for healthcare professionals. They want healthcare professionals to have conscience protections so that they're encouraged to go into the medical field. We do need a lot of great medical professionals that are out there. We want to encourage them to join the field, but we also want to encourage them to work consistently with their beliefs. And for all of these polls, you can find them, like I mentioned, that one Washington Post article that details the taxpayer funding of abortion issues. Gallup poll and Pew Research also have a lot of great polling. And Knights of Columbus works with Marist a lot, and so you can see a lot of their polling. And SBA List also has a lot of polling that you can look up online easily. It's readily available online. You can Google it, pretty easy to find. Also, just in general, there are some general principles that we want to keep in mind when it comes to communicating about this issue. Number one, we want to highlight the supportive services that we have out there. Students for Life of America does a great job. They have a whole branch dedicated to supportive services and talking about those services, making sure women know about those resources. You'd be surprised at how many people don't know about the free services and free resources that are available. So I'm talking about pregnancy centers. I'm talking about both publicly and privately available resources and services in states all across the country. Talk about how you can get free ultrasounds, free diapers, free baby clothes, free housing. There is free housing available in a lot of areas to mothers who need it. They need to get back on their feet, and there are a lot of organizations that are out there that just want to help. But women first need to know about those resources before they can actually take advantage of them. Another thing that we should be emphasizing in our communications is humanizing the unborn child. When we're talking about the unborn child in the womb, we can't just say, oh, the 6-week law or the 20-week law or the 15-week law. We can't just say those things. We have to describe what the baby looks like in the womb to the person that we're talking to so they understand what's actually happening in an abortion at that time. So for example, the baby has a heartbeat at 6 weeks. We can't just say 6-week law. When we have a 6-week law, when the baby has a heartbeat, later on they develop their fingerprints. They have fingers and toes. They have their organ systems developing or already developed. They have brain waves. They can yawn. They suck their thumb. They can taste. Those are all things that we need to be talking about because it truly humanizes the baby in the womb and it paints a true picture of what's actually happening when there's an abortion occurring. It's hurting both the mother and the child. And the last thing is we need to make sure we are avoiding letting others define the narrative. Like we mentioned before, you hear these nice terms like maternal health and reproductive freedom from pro-abortion advocates, but those are not actually nice terms. We know that abortion is the opposite of freedom. It's not only, the main thing is that it's taking away the rights of the unborn child in the womb, but it's also taking away the dignity of human life for both the mother and the child. Freedom, if you're talking about freedom, we're also talking about the taxpayers who are forced to pay for abortions. That's not freedom. We're talking about taking away parental rights. We're talking about taking away conscience protections. That has absolutely nothing to do with freedom. It's the opposite of freedom. So we can't let them hijack those terms either. And the last thing I'll mention is looking back to what Denise said about different groups of people that need different messaging that's communicated to them. We are not going to communicate the same way to a young person than we are to somebody in their 70s and 80s. We're not going to communicate the same way to someone who believes in Jesus and somebody who is an atheist. We're just not going to communicate the same ways. Think about TikTok videos. Those probably aren't going to reach a significant portion of the population. Even the type of humor and the type of language that we use, and in the younger generations, it may not be able to reach the older generations in the same way. So be careful about how you're targeting your message to different groups. And you might also be thinking, what can students do? What can I do? We have these lawyers that are talking about this for us, and they're out there, they're dissecting the language. Well, what can I do as a student? There's a lot that you can do as a student. Go to your church leaders, have them talk about these issues, have them talk about abortion in general. We need support from our church communities. We need support from the leaders at your schools who are pro-life leaders. Start your pro-life groups, expand your pro-life groups, talk to your friends and family, and also get involved with Students for Life of America's initiatives where they truly are going door to door and talking to people about these issues. There are a significant amount of ways that you can get involved as a student. Be thinking about pro-life careers too. As you graduate from college and you go off, be deciding what do I want to do? What can I do? If it's going full-time into the pro-life movement, like all of us have, be thinking about the different options that you have to go and save lives in your professional careers. And Erica, I want to throw the last question to you. Can you we've been talking a lot about this doom and gloom, how awful these pro-abortion initiatives are. But can you just give us a message of hope as our final question for today?
Yes, absolutely. I think were all of you guys yesterday at the march? Can you raise your hand if you were at the march? Okay. All right. We were out there in the snow, tens of thousands of people marching behind one unified goal because we know the truth that life is precious, that life begins in the womb, and that life deserves protection from the earliest moments in the womb. And we are here to be a voice for the voiceless. Just like Bernadette is talking to us about how to communicate this. We, all of us in this room, we need to be bold about talking about the issues. The reasons that you're here to listen to us is so that you can learn, so that you can go out of this room and take even just maybe one thing that you remember from our talk and share it with people that are not here and that are not outside of this room. But the fact is, it took us 50 years to overturn the wrongly decided Roe v. Wade decision. But now is the time for the pro-life movement to keep moving forward. So even if we do have bumps along the way, ballot initiatives in states that don't go our way, we are the pro-life movement perseveres, and we have a long road ahead of us and a lot of work to change hearts and minds. So I want you all to be joyful, to be happy about the fact that you're here, to be happy about the fact that you're here to defend truth, and then just to be equipped and to be bold when you leave here today, when you leave this summit, this wonderful experience that you've had in DC, and not be afraid to share it with your friends and family.
All right, can we give our panelists a big round of applause? All right, we have a little bit of time for Q&A, and I know that we have a couple people in the back that are going to come up here and make sure that, right in the front, we're going to come up here and make sure that you all can come up and, well, not you all. We have a very limited amount of time, actually. But while people are coming up to ask questions, I do want to plug, we do have 2 more speakers from Alliance Defending Freedom that are going to be speaking later today. Tim Garrison is going to be speaking more about abortion-related ballot initiatives later today on the main stage. And then we have Tyson Langhofer. He's also going to be speaking later on when you all get back together in the main room as well.
Hi, I have a question. I just want to know how pro-lifers should make a pro-life ballot when they're trying to put in an abortion referendum that protects life from conception.
If I understand the question, how do we go about getting a pro-life amendment?
Like, how should it be written?
I won't shock you when I say lawyers are debating over how that needs to be written. but we're trying to learn the lessons from Kansas and Kentucky, where the language didn't move the voters. My view is that it needs to be as simple as possible. Something to the effect of, this state constitution does not contain or protect a right to abortion or the funding thereof. The simpler the language, the easier it is to talk to people and explain it to them. Remember, I just spent a lot of time telling you how confusing the language of the pro-abortion referendum are, intentionally so. So we need to be very clear in how clear and simple in how we would write a pro-life amendment.
Hi, thank you so much for your time. I'd just like to start off with saying that I happen to be from the great or not so great state of Ohio, depending on your point of view. But an interesting question I thought I had is, do you think that a successful venue that pro-lifers in Ohio could look at attacking is the language of the 14th Amendment, attacking through that? The 14th Amendment states that we have equal right and protections guaranteed by the federal government. Do you think that is a valuable venue we could use to pursue fetal rights and their right to not be killed?
The 14th Amendment, properly understood, as you mentioned, covers all persons, including the unborn in the womb. We have many constitutional scholars and other legal experts who are advancing that argument. But what we also need to remember is that these are state constitutional amendments. So we need to talk about what the state constitution says as well. And in most circumstances, it's going to mirror the 14th Amendment. So those are valuable arguments. Obviously, it is not an argument that the Supreme Court has yet to sign on to, but there is certainly hope that they will in the future.
Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you for everything, all your efforts. I am from Maryland, and they passed the bill last year that we're paying $1 million to fund training non-physicians to do abortions with no restrictions on what types of abortions, at what stage of that they're doing it, and they're not physicians, and we're paying for this. And we do have the reproductive freedom amendment on our ballot for this November. And so all of this is very horrible, but are we ever going to be able to dial that back? I mean, I feel like it's going to happen because our state is so liberal. And among the pro-lifers, we're like, well, now we can't even speak out. Now we can't even pray. We can't, like we can't even try to advocate for the pregnant woman anymore, as you were alluding. And we won't even be able to try to dial it back with any restrictions. What is my hope?
I would start with, first of all, you can always speak out and you can always pray. If you are being prevented from speaking out by any government entity, you should reach out to us. But on the ballot initiatives in particular, I would start with talking to your friends and family, talking to the people you know from your church or your workplace or your school. My guess is that there are a lot of people on this issue who are somewhere in the middle. They don't know exactly how they feel. And they think that by voting for these ballot measures, they're putting into place exactly the system that was there before Dobbs. And many of them are much broader than that. And my guess is that if more people knew that, more people would be opposed to them.
I just kind of want to add, we also need to hold our leaders accountable. And sometimes our state leaders surprise us, even if they're not necessarily on our side on the abortion issue. So back, I think it may have been in 2017 or 2018, there was a bill in California. I'm originally from California. That was introduced that would put chemical abortion drugs on college campuses. At the time, we had a very Democrat governor, Jerry Brown, and he was expected to sign the bill into law. He did not sign that bill into law. Now, unfortunately, later on, Governor Gavin Newsom did sign a very similar bill into law, but Governor Jerry Brown's actions significantly delayed having chemical abortion pills on college campuses all across California. So please be praying for our state leaders, because you never know if they're going to surprise you.
Hey there. Thank you for coming to speak today. I'm fascinated to hear about the legal side of things, especially with regards. You seem to talk a lot about the vagueness of some of these laws, which is an effective marketing ploy for getting it passed. But it also sort of leaves the door open for interpretation from a pro-choice perspective. And so I'm wondering, is there a way? I don't know if ADF already does this, but can we call their bluff and, in a sense, when they say maternal health, actually use what maternal health means? Because, like, I have a friend who's in law school, right? And he showed me a document the other day. He had to look at precedent going back to the 15th century in Britain. And I don't think in the history of the world has maternal health ever included abortion. So can we call their bluff? Can we use precedent to set a pro-life agenda?
I want to encourage you that even in states where we might lose these amendments, the battle is not done. The battle is going to continue in legislatures and in courts as to what, if anything's clear from this talk, what do these amendments really mean and what do they cover? And there will be plenty of opportunity for lots of smart lawyers to make arguments like you just outlined.
And it's also up to each and every one of you to be communicating about what these vague terms could actually mean. So everything that we just talked about on this panel, make sure you're out there communicating about what it could mean for the public.
Hello, I'm also from Ohio. I actually live near the Michigan border, so I've seen both battles in the pro-life movement, both in Michigan and Ohio. One thing that I found very hard, I have a lot of friends who are pro-choice, and one argument that I kept seeing coming up on Facebook and being talked about was our abortion measure was very, very hard to read. As you guys stated, I actually met up with a legal analyst who broke it down for me, and quite frankly, it scares me. It was very radical bill. And one of the things was everybody was afraid, and it's not true, but they were afraid that in cases of ectopic, I want to say I'm terrible with the terminology, but pregnancies, and also pregnancies, such as, you have a miscarriage or you try to induce a abortion yourself. There was a lie that was being spread that, if you tried to induce abortion yourself, you would not be able to get medical treatment. Was a big one I heard. If they didn't pass it, which obviously wasn't true. Another one I heard was if you did have a miscarriage and the child was still in you, you wouldn't be able to have a DNC to remove the child, which obviously wasn't true. And I was kind of wondering, like, how, from being a man, it's hard to begin with to make statements, but what's like some ways that we can combat that? Because that was really, I think, one of the, aside from the freedom, it was branded as a very big freedom bill. That those were kind of some of the issues that were really pushed out hard and obviously false, especially when I looked at had a legal analyst look at it all. How do we combat that, do you think?
Yeah, so I think this is frankly, educating people. And one of the things that we saw immediately after Dobbs was the pro-abortion side trying to confuse everybody about what this means and make people afraid. The reality is that an ectopic pregnancy is not the same as an abortion, and a miscarriage is not the same as an abortion. And Planned Parenthood always realized that until just shortly after Dobbs, they decided to change wording on their website to confuse the issues and make it seem like having an abortion is the same thing as treatment for an ectopic pregnancy or a miscarriage. So we know that an abortion is the intentional killing of an unborn baby in its mother's womb. A miscarriage is a tragic loss of life, not what the mother wants. She's not going out and seeking to kill her child. And treatment for a miscarriage is different than treatment for an abortion, but also an ectopic pregnancy. Now, that's actually quite a common condition. It happens in 1 out of 50 pregnancies where the baby implants outside of the uterus, and that baby won't be capable of growing there, and if it bursts, it can be life-threatening for the mother. So treatment for an ectopic pregnancy is also not an abortion. And so the Planned Parenthood and the pro-abortion side has been trying to confuse this, but doctors know, and doctors use their reasonable medical judgment when they are treating patients. And doctors are still allowed to give women the care that they need when they're facing a life-threatening condition like an ectopic pregnancy or when they're treating for miscarriages. So it's really just the narrative and the fear that's trying to confuse people and is really harming women. This is where the pro-abortion side, they show their hand of how they're not really concerned with women and women getting the care that they need, because doctors are able to provide that treatment, and no law is preventing women, no law that either saves life earlier in pregnancy or anything like that prevents a woman from getting life-saving treatment that she needs.
As for your pro-life man comment, please continue speaking out. We need pro-life men in our movement. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. See us, go visit our website at adflegal.org. Alliance Defending Freedom. Again, you can find us on all our social channels. Thank you, everybody.